The format of this meeting is one 10-minute speaker, a coffee break, and the main speaker. Tonight, our first speaker is Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa, alcoholic. Thanks so much for the warm welcome. We were welcomed so nicely when we got here. My sobriety date is June 6, 2018. Catherine is my sponsor, who you'll get to hear from as a longer speaker, and my home group is the Bellflower Big Book Group. And, I have to admit, when I walked in here, I started getting a little anxious, and it wasn't because I was going to be sharing with you guys my story. It was because I looked around and started remembering my elementary school days because I've been deeply uncomfortable since that time. Like, I started having flashbacks like, oh my gosh, being that awkward little girl again and not knowing how to talk to people. And despite a very supportive, loving upbringing, like always being afraid that the sky was going to fall in or that just always feeling like something was really, really wrong. And, I kind of just grew up that way and did whatever I could, whether it was food, whether it was obsessing on guys, whether it was shopping, like just to try and fill that void always. And I was never really presented with the opportunity to drink until right before I went to college. And my first time drinking, I was with a couple of friends, and I will never forget that it was the first time that those icky feelings like went away. I felt warm and floaty, and like my smile got really big, and I felt kind of invincible, like I could do anything, and I just wanted to stay there really all night. And I was like the good girl. I got straight A's. I never got in trouble. I stayed out that night like way past 3 a.m. It was way before cell phones, and my dad was terrified, and it wasn't great. Nothing really that bad happened. I was fine, but I was like, okay, I really like this. I can't wait to do this again. I left Southern California, went to Oregon for college, and once I got up there, it was on. I was pretty much doing anything that people handed me. I was dropping acid and smoking weed and, just whatever I could to change the way that I felt. And that just began me putting alcohol at the center of my life. If you didn't drink like me or party like me, I didn't want to be associated with you. And then, in the meantime, I've gone through college, gotten okay grades, somehow managed to get through, and then stayed up there in Oregon and created a lot of wreckage at my first job at a newspaper, got very friendly with some of the other staff members at our happy hours. And it wasn't that fun to be there anymore, so I decided to move like we do. I decided to do a geographic and come back to Southern California. This wasn't serving me well either because my friends down here from high school didn't like how I was drinking, so I went to San Francisco, and that was really great because I could just be almost kind of anonymous. I could start a new life there, and I got married there. It was very toxic, and got divorced there. And when I got divorced, that was one of the points in my drinking where it definitely got a lot worse. I started drinking every day, really relying on it to make me feel like I was going to be all right, drinking alone, and had an incident where I was taking pills that had been prescribed to me and drinking and texting my friend I didn't want to live anymore, and she called for a welfare check on me because no one could get into my apartment, and I woke up with 2 police officers standing over me, and I think it was too much paperwork for them to 5150 me, so they didn't do it. And then I kind of like perked up and put on some eyeshadow and went out drinking that night. So, shrugged it off. And at that point, I started a new career, and I moved back down to Long Beach, where I'm from. Lots of moving around, lots of escaping whatever problems, because of course I'm not the problem. Moved back down to Long Beach and started this career and had the type of schedule that let me drink very often. I happened to work with people that like to drink the way I did. And it kind of progressed and progressed and progressed. And I eventually ended up picking up some other substances that helped me to stay awake a lot longer so I could drink more. And pretty soon I'm going from doing that thing I never said I was never going to do. Like, I'm not going to show up to work loaded because I take care of people. I'm in a service position in healthcare, and I'm not going to show up to work like that. And I started doing that. I started coming home and not wanting to drink, but drinking anyway, like against my will. And what happened for me is before I started drinking, I was suicidal, and drinking in my teenage years made me feel great. And then over time, as my drinking progressed and progressed and progressed, I wanted to die again. And I got to this turning point where I was like, okay, I can either, do like a 30-day cleanse and just get rid of the drugs, because that's the problem. I'm never going to get rid of the alcohol. Of course, it's just the drugs. And, or, I could maybe do something about this. And in the meantime, my brother had gotten sober about 3 years before this. And in the meantime, as my drinking is getting worse and worse, I'm watching him flourish. He's gotten healthy. He's put weight on. He has a job. He has invited me to go see him take his 1-year birthday chip. And I've gone to this big meeting, and I've seen a lot like tonight, a lot of people like mingling and hugging and laughing, and, just that ease and comfort that we see in these rooms, that was all I ever wanted from alcohol. And the wheels started to turn, and I think basically what God intervened and kind of nudged me to the direction of like, why don't you ask him for help, And that's what I did. And I talked to my brother and his wife, and I let him know what was going on with me, which I usually would never do. Usually, because I'm a liar, I would be like, I'm doing so good. I'm working multiple jobs, and I'm dating, and I'm going to be in grad school. And life is like, I'm like crushing it, And really, actually, I want to kill myself. But so I finally got honest with him and his wife. We were just talking in the car ride over here about our first meetings and our early sobriety. And she encouraged me to do a lot of women's meetings. That's what I did. I did a lot of step studies, and just really got to experience this group of people that was happy, that had found the solution. I got a sponsor and started working the steps, and I highly, highly recommend getting a sponsor and working the steps. And for me, that was how I ended up getting the relief and being able to really get rid of those icky, yucky, disgusting feelings that I have. And I will still have those if I'm not, vigilant in my program and I'm not doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. But my life today is actually really, really good. Someone mentioned a baseball pitcher right before I started speaking. And, my dad is a lot older now. He is someone I used to go to his house and drink all his alcohol. Even right before I got sober, would drink with him and then keep drinking after he had gone to sleep. And, now what I do is I go over there, and I never cared about sports at all, but I sat down with him to watch baseball, because in this program I learned, we try to be useful to other people, be of service. And now we have the best time together, like sitting and watching the game, and he's 89. And like, if I was still drinking, I would not be there at all, or I would be drunk, or, I wouldn't be able to show up for him and the rest of my family. The friends that I have today in this program are like real true friends, that when they ask me how I'm doing and when I ask them how they're doing, like, we actually care. It's not just like, what are you going to do for me? How are you going to help me get into that place? Or what are you going to get for me? It's not that kind of relationship. It's like we actually love and care about each other. And I did not know how to have those relationships until I came to AA and worked the steps. I've gotten to travel a lot. I just was in New York with a couple of sober girlfriends, and we had a freaking amazing time. I went to Australia in January. I'm in graduate school right now for my master's, and there's just a lot of things that when I think about it, like if I was still drinking, I mean, first of all, I don't think I would have survived, especially the pandemic. If I was still drinking, I think I probably would have either drank myself to death or, committed suicide. But I'm just so incredibly grateful to be sober today, and not just physically sober, but to be happy and peaceful and have a good life, and to have a freaking amazing sponsor who is a great example and gives me really good direction and guidance, even when it's hard to hear sometimes. But I just want you to know that I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm so grateful that you asked us to come tonight, and I hope that you guys all find here what I found. Thank you.
We will now observe a 10-minute coffee break. Please return to your seats quickly and quietly when you hear the bell rings for our main speaker. To allow our main speaker the time and respect they deserve. Thank you. Thank you all for taking your seats quickly and quietly. We're now going to do the serenity prayer again. God, Grant me the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And now, please welcome our main speaker, Kat from Seal Beach.
Hi, I'm Catherine, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is September 17th, 2011, and my sponsor is Nancy M., and my home group is the Seal Beach Speakers Group. And I just tell you those things because, one, if you want to come find me, you know where to find me on a Monday night at 7:30. If I say something weird, you can tell my sponsor, and then you'll also know how much time I've been sober. So, and you know, like many of us in AA, I've been taught to share in a general way what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And so that's what I'm going to try to give you. My brain is a little all over the place tonight. Like on the way here, Teresa and I were just yakking, and I missed a turn. And so I don't know what you're going to get. And if you don't hear something that you feel helps you stay sober tonight, I want to let you know, first of all, welcome to Rich and Stacy. And but you are in the mecca of Alcoholics Anonymous. Southern California is just rich with AA, and this is a great meeting, and there are many, many more AA meetings all over the place where people are carrying the message every day, every morning, every afternoon. And I feel very, very lucky to be here in this area and get to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to thank Jan for the warm welcome, and Alan for asking me to come and share, and Joe for chatting things up. You know, just being able to chit-chat before the meeting helps me to relax, and I really like that custom that you have of the Serenity Prayer before the main speaker. Like, it really grounds me and reminds me why I'm here, so thank you. Okay, so what it was like, I grew up in San Diego County in a little agricultural town in North San Diego County, and the only reason why that's important to my story is that because it was a small town, everybody knew each other, and there were a lot of churches, and there were farms, and you hung with the people who you went to church with, and we didn't go to church. My mom was a single mom in the 80s. She didn't have much education. She didn't have a high school diploma, and she was divorced. And you know, today that is not that big of a deal, but in the 80s, you know, in the mid 70s and the 80s, like a single woman with a bunch of kids, she had 3 kids, you know, living in an apartment, she didn't have a car, she didn't have a high school diploma, in a small town with a lot of churches. Everybody knew who we were, you know, and not only that, my mom, I love my mom. My mom is an amazing person, but she is wild. She is a child of the 60s. She always has been and always will be. She floats through life. She doesn't have a plan. She just enjoys life to the fullest. And we were just along for the ride, you know. So I'm the oldest, and I have 2 little sisters. They're a year younger than I am, and they're twins. And because of our circumstances, like, we didn't really have a lot of money, you know, and you know, I would love to say, like, with like a noble voice, that I didn't know we were poor, but I knew we were poor, okay? Like, I knew we were poor. We were poor, you know. My mom was on welfare, you know, and like when we would go to the grocery store, she'd have to get her food stamps out, and the cashier would go and roll her eyes, and you know, so there was that, right? And although that shouldn't have made me feel different, because there were plenty of other people in town who were in our same income bracket, it made me feel different. I felt different. I felt like I didn't have the same things that other people had, you know, that I didn't measure up. And the fact is I did sometimes get treated differently because of that, you know, and that was just a reality of our circumstances, you know, and I didn't understand that as a kid. I really didn't get that, you know, and then because My mom was divorced from my dad in a small town. There was some infidelity in the relationship, and everybody in town knew about it, and there was some drama, and there was and I didn't know all of those things as a kid, but I felt the vibe. I felt the vibe, like when we would walk into the video store and all of a sudden my mom would get cold, and just sort of stiffen up. I knew there was somebody there we were avoiding, little things like that. So I was always a hyper perceptive kid. I was very aware of your feelings. I was always watching you and checking you to see how you were feeling, because that was going to tell me how the day was going to go and how the night was going to go. And even though my mom is an incredibly loving person, she's a wild child, so there was a lot of interesting stuff happening in our house. She became friends with a lot of people who ride motorcycles, and there were things coming across the border, and my mom was having a good time participating and moving those things, and I didn't know that, but there were just a lot of colorful people around in our duplex. A lot of uncles, interesting uncles who I wasn't related to, and ladies who had long hair and leather, and there was just cool. They were cool, from my perspective as a kid, we had all the cool people in our duplex, and there were motorcycles, and I just knew I was going to grow up and ride a motorcycle and go back and forth to Tijuana and wear flowy dresses like my mom. And, and I love what you said, Teresa, about being in here. School was at first a place of confinement. It was a place of rules. It was a place where I wasn't accepted. It was a place where I didn't feel like I fit in. But over time, I started to notice that I was actually really good at school. And I started to notice that people didn't react to my mom that well. I started to notice that people who had a lot of nice things and who were well accepted in society didn't necessarily like my mom. The people at church and the teachers, and they would kind of judge my mom a little bit. And as I got better and better at school, what happened is I started questioning my mom's judgment, and I started to really seek the approval of teachers and people at church and things like that. And it made me really suspect of authority. It made me really not feel like I couldn't trust adults, because the adult who was in charge of me was not somebody who was trustworthy. And I started to notice things that I didn't notice when I was really little, that we didn't have a lot of food in the house, and that sometimes we didn't go to school because my mom just didn't care, and I didn't notice those things when I was little, but as I started getting older, I was I don't think you're supposed to do that when you're a mom. I don't think that, so I started kind of questioning her and started, wanting the approval of these people who had what I wanted. They had what I wanted. I would see these teachers pull up in nice cars, and then they had pictures of their husbands and their children, and they seemed to live in nice homes, and I kind of started wanting those things, So I was you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get good grades. I'm going to be a good girl, because I think that's what it takes to be one of these people. I'm going to be a good girl. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to get good grades. And then someday I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to move far, far away from here, and I'm going to have the life that all these people have. And that was my plan. You'll notice that I'm here in AA tonight. So there were some diversions to that plan, As I became a teenager, I saw that, being good and getting good grades didn't necessarily mean that people were going to accept me, or that they were going to forgive me, or that I was necessarily going to belong, because when I started hanging out with the kids who were in all the AP and honors classes, there were still a lot of differences, there was something in me that craved darkness, I craved darkness. I don't know what it was. I couldn't explain it. Every time I was at some nice kid's house, they had some big house and a nice family. I remember one time in high school, I went over to this girl's house. she had like these lovely parents, and she lived in this like beautiful house. And I went to her house after school, and her mom had shopped for her while she was at school and had a brand new outfit like laid out on her bed and snacks laid out for us on the counter. And I was like, what a bitch. Like, that was my reaction. That was like my natural reaction. Pardon my French, people on Zoom. But I did not react to life like those people. I immediately intuitively knew that I was different from these people. And I somehow kind of intuited that no matter how hard I tried, no matter what I did, no matter what grades I got, no matter what clothes I wore, no matter how hard I worked to please these people, that I was not going to fit in, And like, I started seeking something out to fulfill me, to get relief from these feelings, And like, at first it was music. Like, I think I heard like Jane's Addiction on the radio, and I was like, yeah, been caught stealing. Yeah, like, okay, like I don't know. It's like my little 15-year-old self kind of felt like inspired by this like rebellion, And but I didn't like hang out with the quote bad kids yet. Like, I was still trying to like be on the track team and like, do those things. But one day I bumped into this kid in class who was like really cool, and she was like hanging out with people who I was kind of afraid of, but she liked this band that I liked. And so we kind of started talking and becoming friends, and I was like torn. I was torn because here I am, this kid who's like really striving to like please people and get good grades. And at the same time, like, I just feel this pull to be with people who want to rebel, and people who want to like, who are their hair dyed black, and like people who are going to grow up to ride motorcycles, And like, and so I just I had a conflict, And then one day, I was talking to my mom about my plans to go to college, and she laughed and she said, oh yeah, you're not going to go away to school. You're just going to go to community college because we can't pay for that. And then I was like, see, that's what you get for being good. That's what you get for working all those years to get good grades. That's what you get. Why am I bothering? This is something I repeatedly said over and over throughout my life. It's like, I only did good things because I wanted to get paid in some way. I didn't have a God in my life. I didn't have any kind of spirituality, and it didn't look attractive to me either, because when I would look at people who supposedly had spirituality, to me, they didn't really seem very happy. They actually seemed kind of miserable, To me, it seemed like church was the same thing as spirituality, and that essentially just meant following a lot of rules that made you miserable, And so I just didn't have an answer. I felt so baffled. I didn't know. I wanted the code for life. And everywhere I looked, nobody seemed to have it. And I felt so lost, So I started seeking out art and music even more, because every time I'd listen to a song, like, it seemed to speak to my soul, So I would seek out the people who liked the music that I liked. And of course, I ended up hanging out in what is called Smoker's Field. That's like out back of the school. That's where all the metal kids hang. That's where all the punk kids hang. And you guys, I instantly felt at home. Like, as soon as I started hanging out with these kids, I was like, heck yes, like, they feel the way I feel. Like, they listen to the music that I listen to, and they're smart. These were smart kids. They were not dumb kids. They were really smart. They just didn't care about school, And what happened is I started to not care about school. And so by the time that I was 17 years old, I was primed and ready for a drink. I was ready to rebel. I was ready to just like tell everyone, double middle fingers, go to hell. I was ready for it, And especially because I had finally fully turned against my mom, And so by the time that I was 18, I had managed to graduate high school, but my whole first year after high school was just a big drunken weed meth binge. Like, by the time I was like 18, I had like a daily meth habit. I was just like hanging out in like storage units with people who were taking apart BMX bikes like all night long. I had a little boyfriend who was in county, and I would go visit him, and he'd try to convince me to make out with him so that people would think that he wasn't gay. And like, I don't know, just like weird, like this is how I was living, I had another boyfriend too, by the way, you know what I mean? I didn't have scruples. I didn't have morals. I was really just like living to like blot out my feelings, And I had 2 younger sisters at home, and eventually that wild mom turned to me and said, "Hey, I have to raise these other 2 kids. Either you get out or you get sober. And I don't know what you're going to do. Maybe you go to like a 12-step program. I don't know what you need to do, but you can't live here if you're going to live like that." Because I was stealing from her. I would fly into rages and like break stuff in the house because I was on drugs. That's what you do when you're on drugs, I would yell and curse at her. I mean, I was miserable. And drinking and using didn't make me feel better. It would temporarily, but eventually I just felt worse, because what happens when you're using all this stuff, you're drinking, you're using, and then you realize it's temporary. And you realize, I knew even at 16 years old that there wasn't enough alcohol in an ocean-filled world to make this kid happy. I knew it. I knew I was going to have to live like that for the rest of my life, and that I'd probably die young. I knew that at 16, So to get my mom off my back, and so that they wouldn't kick me out, I went to AA. But I didn't really do AA, not the way I understand it now. I'm spending a little more time on this part of my life because I see there's a lot of young people. And I want you to know that you don't have to leave Alcoholics Anonymous for any reason at all. You can go through everything in life sober. You can do that. You don't have to do this perfect. You don't have to do it perfect at all. You can make a lot of mistakes and you don't have to leave, So I want you to know that. And I didn't know that. And like, I got a sponsor in name only. And what that means is like, I didn't really call her. I didn't really talk to her. I didn't go to meetings with her. I didn't tell her what was going on with me. I barely worked steps. I have a vague recollection of writing some things down that I was mad about on a piece of paper. I did not open the big book. I never read the big book. I went to whatever meetings I felt like, whenever I felt like it. I showed up late and I left early, and I never had commitments at any of my meetings. I never put money in the basket, even though I somehow always found money to get loaded before I got sober. And then I didn't talk to you. You guys were old, you were crusty, you smelled, and you wore ugly clothes. And I don't care about coffee, so F off. Like I really just I didn't even want to be here. I was really just here to get my parents off my back. And but here's the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous. It worked on me anyway. It worked on me anyway. Like gradually I met some cool people, and like some of the things they said kind of wormed their way into my brain. And I stayed physically sober enough to kind of get some things together. I went back to school. I started going back to community college, got a couple of good grades, realized, okay, I could maybe do this. I got a job. I kept a job. I had never been able to keep a job for longer than a couple months. I kept a job for a whole year. Like little things kind of got better. But eventually I turned 21 and it was like, well, that was an overreaction. I've never had a legal drink before, and I was off to the races, and like, this time around, I didn't pick up illegal drugs, but almost immediately from the time that I first started drinking again, I was right back where I began. I mean, it took a couple months, but I was, drinking, all the things that I had built up, the job, going back to school, all those things started to like slide across the bar, meaning that that's what I was using to pay for my drinks. Like I would show up to class drunk, or I would, so things started to kind of slip again almost immediately. However, you guys taught me a few things, and I thought I was pretty smart. I had picked up that 20 questions, and I thought, hey, if I do the reverse of what the 20 questions are, I'm going to be able to use all this outside stuff to fix these inside problems. If I get that college degree, if I get that husband, I went right back to that thinking from when I was a kid. The outside things are going to fix this inside hole, I have a 20-year-old son and a 17-year-old son. And I don't know if they have what we have. I don't know if they have this disease. But I will say that I feel like my younger son has a spiritual malady of some kind. And I was trying to explain to him what the spiritual malady feels like for me. I got educated when I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous about what alcoholism is. I didn't know when I was 21 and I went back out to drink because I hadn't really spent much time learning about alcoholism and AA. But the second time around when I finally got sober again, I learned about alcoholism. It's a 3-part disease. It affects my mind, it affects my soul, and it affects my body, And usually it starts off with an obsession. It starts with my mind. I get uncomfortable. I get a little, someone said something to me, some bleeding deacon at the meeting told me that I, supposed to wear pants at Monday night, or, somebody, told me I didn't do something right, or I just get a little uncomfortable, or somebody says something, my husband, or somebody says judges me or something like that. And it doesn't seem like it's a big deal at the time. But then a week later, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still irritated about it. I'm still mad about it, And then another little thing happens, and another little thing, and those things start to pile up, and then a drink's starting to look pretty good, And until I have some kind of a spiritual solution for that kind of mental obsessive thinking, I'm gonna drink. And when I drink, what happens is all bets are off. I have an allergy of the body, which means that I cannot predict what's going to happen when even one little bit of alcohol gets into this body. Even one little bit. You guys, today, I don't even use mouthwash that has alcohol in it. That's how afraid I am of alcohol. I really don't run scared through the grocery store, but I'm not taking any chances these days, I'm not taking any chances. So, what happened is, from 21 to 36, I drank almost every day, and I thought that by getting a college degree, getting a husband, cleaning up on the outside, that somehow one of those things was having children, that those things were going to make me happy. I just needed to settle down. I needed to just calm down. I needed to just grow up. And just so that in case you're wondering, those things don't make you grown up. Getting a car or a husband or kids or a house, that doesn't make you grown up. I know lots of children who own homes, I know lots of babies who have babies, and I was one of them. And, what happened is I found a nice codependent man, while I was in college, who would hold my hair while I was puking in front of Barney's Beanery in Santa Monica, someone who would drive me whenever I was drunk, I used to say he didn't know what he was getting himself into, but he was there, he was watching me. And I think part of it was normalized because he had a lot of friends who were also partying the way I was, some of them who are now sober, so I was hanging out with people who were drinking the way I was drinking. So I got married, went to college, was drunk in my classes, still managed to pass my classes, had jobs, held jobs for many years, drank on the job, did not get fired from those jobs. You guys, if in the back of your mind you're going, well, why is she telling us this? If she didn't get fired, if she didn't get kicked out of college, why do we need to hear this? Because it got worse. Whenever there weren't consequences, I just sank lower and lower and lower. And the more the outside looked good, the more I wanted to kill myself. The more I wanted to just die, And I would like wake up in my beautiful house with my beautiful husband, with my beautiful kids, with my beautiful car outside, and I would look at my yellow jaundiced face and my shaking hands, and I would puke bile one more time, and then get my kids ready for school and want to die, want to drop them off at school and want to come home and just kill myself, you know? And I would just say, tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. You know, just like today when we're sober, we take it one day at a time. I was just putting off suicide one day at a time, you know, until finally I just couldn't take it anymore. You know, like my poor husband suffered 9 years of marriage with me drinking, you know, just raging. I got violent with him. I was an abusive wife. I was a neglectful mother. You know, we lived across the street from my kids' school, across the street, and they were late every day. Every day, you know, I was that mom, you know, every day, you know, and I would be like jerking their little shirts over their heads and blaming them for being late. You know, I just like could not take responsibility for my own actions. I heard someone say in AA once that like we get, our development gets frozen at the age that we took our first drink, you know? So I was like a 16-year-old living a 36-year-old person's life, you know? I had no idea what I was doing being a mom. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to be a wife. You know, I loved that man, but I didn't know how to love him, you know? And I didn't know how to cope with my feelings. I felt miserable. I didn't understand why all these things weren't making me happy. How come this picket fence? How come that job, that good job? How come that car? How come all this material stuff isn't making me? It's supposed to, isn't it? Aren't I supposed to be happy? But no, I was miserable, you know? And so eventually I just tried to kill myself. You know, I got in one more fight with my husband, and in a blackout, I took a bunch of pills, drank 4 bottles of wine, and locked myself in our bathroom, and I just really did want to die. I really wanted to die. My little children, this is how selfish I am. My children were down the hall asleep, you know. I didn't even have the decency to go to a hotel or something, you know, like I just right there in the house with my kids, you know. My husband, you know, was pounding on the door, you know, he had to call 911. I got 5150'd. I went to a mental health facility, and I was really disappointed when I woke up. You know, I was not relieved. I was not relieved that I was alive, you know. I wanted relief from my misery, and I thought that I was toxic, that I was never going to be good for my kids, that I had ruined my husband's life. There was no point, there was no place for me to go. Even AA couldn't help me, you know. And, you know, I got home from that 72-hour hold, and they brought me back, and, you know, there were family from out of town there for like an intervention, and, you know, people were trying to help me, and I just ignored them, and I walked straight for about the day I got out of the mental health ward. I drank the very day, and I drank for another year. The reason why I drank is because I had been fired from a teaching job. So I tried to commit suicide because I had been drinking heavily for a whole year. And in that final semester, I was supposed to give a final exam, and people had been complaining. I teach community college. People had been complaining about me all semester long. Parents were calling the department. By the way, if you don't know, like parents don't call the department, you know, in community college, you know? So parents were complaining about me. I was always losing my keys. I was always late. And then finally on the last day of the semester, I was supposed to give a final exam, and I just didn't show up, you know? And then this is how pathetic I am. When I went to go pick up my last paycheck from that job, I brought my children with me as a shield, you know, because I didn't want anyone yelling at me or giving me dirty looks or being mad at me for what I had done, you know. So that's why I tried to commit suicide. And then I drank when I got out of that hospital stay, and I kept drinking for another year until my husband gave me an ultimatum. And he just said, you know, get sober or get out. I don't know what you need to do. Once again, yet another person in my life giving me ultimatums. If you've had like 2 ultimatums, Like one from a partner and then like one from a family member. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope you stay, I hope you stay. Even one really qualifies you, but I just kept drinking for a whole year until he gave me that ultimatum. And then when he gave me that ultimatum, he gave it to me when I was hungover. I don't know how he knew to do that. He had never been to Al-Anon before. But it says in the big book that, if our message is going to have depth and weight, that we should see people when they're shaky, And we had this fight the night before, and I was blacked out, and I couldn't remember what I said or what I had done. And he was like, you can't even remember, and you got to get out, get sober or get out. And I was humiliated, but I remembered you. I remembered Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was like, I can't even kill myself, right? Might as well try AA. I really didn't think this was going to work for me. I thought I had tried it before, So if you're not talking to your sponsor, if you're not going to regular meetings, if you haven't worked all 12 steps out of the big book, you don't get anything. The result is nil until we let go, absolutely, unless you've worked all 12 steps out of the big book. You haven't worked AA. You got to give it the full chance, at least that's my message, I don't know if that's too hardcore, I'm sorry, but that's how I feel about it. And, so I came to AA. I went to a little meeting. We were talking about some of our early experiences. And, if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, this is weird. Yeah, this is weird. This is weird. People of different generations, backgrounds, we are people who normally would not mix. We are people who normally would not be friends. I mean, I would party with you. I would party with anybody. But, sober, in the light of day, would we hang out together, right? This is a miracle that we're all here and that we're alive tonight. We're alive. You could be dead. But you're not. You're here, I'm here. I'm alive and I'm breathing. For me, that's a miracle, Thank you. I was shaky. I didn't think this would work. I detoxed in my seat. I probably should have had a medical detox, but I didn't. I was jaundiced. My whole face was bloated. I rode up to my first meeting with cutoff shorts and a big sweatshirt with a bike to a church and was mad that they didn't have a bike rack. And just full of self-righteousness and ego and self-centeredness you guys loved me. You were so nice to me, just like tonight, coming up to me, telling me where the bagels are and that there's coffee and giving me your phone numbers. And I remembered that from my first time around. I remembered that. And I was like, this is safe, and I wasn't doing so well with my husband. So, I went to a lot of meetings in the beginning because I wanted to just be away from him, But then I got a sponsor, and I knew I wasn't going to stay sober without a sponsor. And she started giving me a rigorous course of action. I had what she calls a hands-on sponsor right from the beginning. I was to call her every day. I was to attend committed meetings regularly. I mean, this sounds controlling, right? I was to read certain pages out of the big book every day. Pray on my knees, she suggested. And I was just like, girl, you're crazy. God, I don't think so. That sounds corny. I'm not doing that. And I didn't for a long time. Some of these things that she suggested to me, I didn't do. And what happened is I got into some pain. And then she would say, well, are you praying? Did you read? Are you going to those regular meetings that you committed to? Have you talked to a newcomer? And of course, my answer was no. I hadn't done any of those things. And that's why I was in pain, And so I started to become convinced that you guys were right, and I started trying some of the stuff that you were suggesting. And I heard those things that my sponsor suggested echoed in the meetings. I would hear people say, when I get up in the morning, I hit my knees and I pray. And I'd be like, oh, and I'd look at her and go, he's doing that, And And because I used to think when I was young and I came to AA that you guys were full of it. I thought you guys were lying. I didn't think you were really praying. I didn't think you were really reading out of the big book or calling your sponsors or like humbling yourself enough to like divulge your innermost demons to some other human being. Like, I really didn't think you were doing that, you know? But guess what? It turns out if you're a doubter, if there are people who are staying sober in this room, they have done that. They have done that. I have done that. I have told my sponsor the deepest, ickiest, grossest, horriblest thoughts I've ever had in my whole life. I let it go. I told her everything. It took some time. I had to learn to trust her. You know, I had to see that she was going to be consistent. I had to see that she was doing those things too, you know. And over time, after working those steps, making amends, cleaning up wreckage, some hard amends, some tough amends, having to pay back somebody that I stole from when I was a teenager, you know, practicing the principles at home, you know, cleaning up the damage in my marriage, applying the principles to my parenting. Like, nobody had ever apologized to me when I was a kid, but I regularly make amends to my kids, you know, like I practice this program in my life in my friendships, you know, and then, you know, I work step 12, like I give it away. You know, you guys asked me to come here and I come here for fun. Yeah, for fun and for free, you know. I like to spend a Saturday night talking to you guys about recovery. Probably the biggest thing that has made a huge difference in my life because of AA is that you guys gave me God. And if you had told me when I was new, like, you're gonna believe in God. You're going to sit in a classroom on a Saturday night and have a conversation with somebody who's 50 years sober, I would have been like, big effing deal. Who cares? Like, I didn't want those things when I was new. When I was new, I just wanted people off my back, you know? But let me just say, I got that and then some. You know, people are not on my back because I'm practicing AA in my life, you know? And then on top of that, thank you, I have a God in my life. So I want to go back to something I didn't quite finish up, which was, I think my son has like that spiritual malady that we have. And I was trying to explain it to him. And I was explaining to him that for a long, long time before I got sober, I felt like I was like a pinky that was like cut from a hand that was just like, it's almost Halloween, so this is a good creepy image, like a little pinky just like disembodied from a person's body, just like crawling on a floor all bloodied and like limp and useless, you know? And like what AA does is reattaches me to this hand, you know, that attaches to all these muscles, that has all these veins and nerves that connect up all the way through the hand to the heart and then to the brain and then to God, you know? And like suddenly when I'm reattaching that pinky, it's useful. It's not just a piece of meat bloody on the floor. It's something that I can use. I can get into action. I can do things, you know? I can like actually be useful to someone. Sorry. So that's what God has done for me. You know, like today, my relationship with God is like ever evolving. You know, I love that in Alcoholics Anonymous, we can like develop a relationship with God. You don't have to have the God that you think God is, you know? Like for me, God is like everything that I lack, everything that I'm not, you know? Like all those things, like, you know, like they say that our instincts have gone awry when we come to AA, you know, and like God helps me to realign my instincts, you know, like when I'm feeling lonely or I'm feeling like not a part of, or I'm feeling like nobody cares, or I'm feeling like I don't measure up, or I'm feeling like, because I still feel those things today, you know, those things still happen when I'm afraid of judgment, when I'm afraid that I'm not going to make it, when I'm afraid that I'm not the person that I think I am, you know. Like, I have this huge, loving God, bigger than AA. My God is even bigger than AA. It's bigger than my home group, bigger than my sponsor. And, like, I rely on this spirit to fill me up so that I lack nothing. I lack nothing in this life, I'm not afraid. So today, instead of getting up in the morning and puking bile and shaking my way through the morning and blaming everybody in my life for the way I woke up, and then just doing that over and over again every day, for 13 years, I've awakened every morning without a hangover, not owing anybody anything, excited for the day to come. And I hit my knees in the morning like they suggested. And I do that because my sponsor told me that when we pray on our knees, it breaks our ego in half. It's humbling, and I need to be humbled. So I pray on my knees in the morning. And then I have the pleasure and the joy of taking some check-ins from girls who I sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I hit a few meetings every week. I have my Monday night meeting. That's my home group. A home group is a meeting that you attend every week, that you have a commitment at, that you participate. You go to the business meeting. For me, that's what a home group is, and I participate in my home group. And then I go to a women's step study, and I go to this little tiny Friday participation meeting. I like to go to little meetings that need a lot of support, And then I have a panel that I take to a facility where women are getting sober. It's the absolute joy of my life. They get to bring their kids with them, and so I get to hold their babies and, carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I get to practice the principles in my marriage and my life. That man who I gave 9 years of drunken, marriage to, we just celebrated 22 years of marriage this month. Thank you. And then I applaud you guys because that's the wife he got from you, And I have a sponsor who knows me and I know her. She's not a sponsor in name only, And I live this program every day. I'm absolutely devoted to it, not because I'm like a slave to AA, but because I love it. I do it of my free will, because I want to, because I enjoy it, because my life is awesome. And I've gotten to have so many cool adventures because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like I've gotten to travel. I got to go to Paris and Italy, and I got my career back. So I'm a professor. I get to teach community college, and I love it. And I have a living amends for my students. My students are my favorite. They're amazing. And I just really enjoy my life, So if anything, like stay sober and stay in AA so you actually enjoy your life. Also young people, so that you're still cute when you're old. I'm just saying, you're going to wear yourself out if you don't. Okay, that's all I got. Thanks. Hey.